Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. I always find it kind of wild to sit down with my contemporaries and contemplate the circumstances of our childhoods, where the parents were often absent or checked out or just drunk, and it seemed that getting fucked up was just the natural, inevitable course of a life. My next guest had a childhood like that, but was blessed with natural smarts that enabled her to graduate high school, go to a good college, and chart a path forward for herself. She was living in Alaska when a sort of divine intervention shifted the trajectory of her life, and then later a tarot card reader helped her recognize her own addiction. She got sober and spent 13 years sober, determined to raise her own children in a way that was different from her own childhood. But then she eventually relapsed and spent the subsequent 13 years drinking again. She is now sober and has a new book out called Recovery Road Trip, which is part narrative and part workbook, a compendium of weekly exercises designed to chart a more fulfilling path of your own. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Won't you please welcome Patti Clark. So what's your full name?
Just my you don't need my full name, but Patti Clark, and that's
Patti Clark, and that's the book is written by Patti Clark.
Exactly.
Nice. And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in San Francisco, and the Bay Area, the 60s and 70s, drug capital of the world. So it was all very available.
And were you in you weren't in the Haight. I mean, what part of town were you in?
No, I was south of San Francisco. I was in the suburbs. What was just small town Redwood City that's now like Silicon Valley intensive.
Right. It's now like $40 million houses.
Yeah, exactly. We grew up in this little, 3-bedroom, 1-bath suburban house. And I went by last time I was in California, and it recently sold for $3 million. And I thought, what the fuck? I mean, honestly, they've changed it a bit, but anyway, I left the Bay Area a long time ago. And the last.
And do you have siblings?
My sister who's also in recovery. My sister.
Right. And was it like a sort of, what was the world like at Redwood City in, what year were you born?
In 58.
58 must have been a paradise.
Well, we didn't think so. When we were growing up in high school, we said Deadwood City, it was boring.
Right.
But as soon as I could, because I hated it for lots of reasons, but I left. I went traveling for 4.5 years.
Why did you hate it?
Well, now that's a good question, because you can sort of turn me inside out and say, I'm sure that a lot of it had to do with the way that my home life was. Right. But also for us, it just was, boring, small town.
What was your home life like that was?
Oh, it was a mess. I grew up in an alcoholic home, both parents alcoholic. My father was successful. My mother was the identified problem.
What did your dad do for work?
He owned a paper distributing company, basically, but it was quite successful. And
isn't that what they do in the office?
Yeah, exactly. A little bit like, a little bit same energy, but sort of an asshole, even though he's a pretty good asshole. So yeah. Anyway, and
was there a lot of like alcoholic chaos in your household growing up? Right.
Complete.
And were they social people? Like, was it a drinking culture? No. Right. So it's antisocial drinking.
Yeah. And actually, when I say this to people, like I say it in meetings, or I say it to people that I'm getting to know, and my parents never spoke. I tend to exaggerate and go into hyperbole all the time. That's kind of who I am. However, in this case, I am not practicing hyperbole. I can count on 2 hands how many times I heard my parents speak together. It was silent. My father would come home. My mother would bring his dinner out on a TV tray, and then sort of back out of the living room and go in the kitchen and drink. And she'd watch TV and he'd watch TV, and she'd sleep on the couch. And Yeah, it was a kind of a
Well,
tragic
that would
process.
be something you'd want to get away from.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So when I finished college, I went to Berkeley. When I finished at Berkeley, I drove across country alone with my little top down and driving along, and ended up in Florida. Despised Florida even back then, back in the 70s. Now I
Where did
cannot.
you end up in Florida?
West Palm, because I had
Amazing.
ugh, it's just now I just like anyway, we're not supposed to get
Well,
political, right? Um,
it's hard to stomach these days. That's for
oh
sure.
Jesus, isn't it ever?
And had you, by the time you had like left Berkeley and were driving across the country, had you like discovered drugs and alcohol?
Oh Jesus, yeah. Oh, I was getting absolute blackout drunk by the time I was, no, I'm not exaggerating. Every weekend when I was
So when
13,
did you have your first drink?
when I was 12,
Right.
13, and 13, I got drunk and there were drugs, and I started taking speed every morning when I was in like junior high and going into high school. I'd set my alarm, hit it, take 3 cross tops, little white speed. And then
Where would you get the speed?
anybody you asked at my high school.
Really, you could just buy it at your high school,
Oh
right?
yeah. There was a woman, a girl I knew that would sit on the steps of the library, and in her backpack she had lids. I heard someone on your podcast saying,
Right.
"Where's the lid?" Yeah, that's what we called it. Um, who sold, $10 bags of weed and speed. It was in her backpack, and at lunchtime you'd go by the stairs of the library, you'd give her money, she'd give it to you. I mean, it was crazy.
And was it fun? Were you having fun as a 12 and 13-year-old doing that?
Well, I mean, that was I was drinking at that, but when I started doing heavier drugs, I was 14, so I don't want to
Right.
exaggerate. Was it fun? Back then, I would have said yes.
I mean,
Now,
I started at 12 also, and
yeah,
I thought it was fun. Like I didn't know.
yeah.
I
Well, fun depends on how you're defining it, right, Nick? I mean, I got sick almost every time because I drank until I could not drink
so
anymore,
you
and
were
so I'd
puking,
vomit
right? Right. You're
everywhere.
blackout drunk. You can't
And
remember
I'm
what happened the night
exactly.
before.
And, honestly, but for the grace of God, as they say, I wasn't, killed, maimed, raped.
Yeah, for sure.
Somehow I managed to, people would carry me home, and,
And
it was a mess.
I'm curious, Redwood, was it a place where you could walk places or did you guys have to drive everywhere? You could walk.
Yeah, you could walk. Yeah.
Ah,
So
that's
we,
nice. Right.
yeah, it was about, a 15-minute walk to get into town from where
Right.
we were. And my dad left when I was 12. I was 12, my sister was 16. And he left because he blamed my mother. So the day before Christmas Eve, so the 23rd, he
Mm-hmm.
walked into the kitchen and said, "Think about Jim Beam," and
Mm-hmm.
slammed the door as he walked out. So it was just before Christmas. I'm sobbing. My sister's sobbing. Um, and actually, my sister wasn't. She was pissed. And then when, after he left, my mother was, you know, really heavy drinker, massive. And so at that point on, by the time I was 13 and older, she passed out. So at the
Right.
end of the day, so I could stay out all night, and no one knew.
And were you in touch with your dad or was he just
No,
AWOL?
he was a Sunday father.
Right.
He was the
Right.
fun guy. He'd take us
Right.
out horseback riding or to a movie or whatever on a Sunday, and then drop us off. And yeah.
And
But
did you like him at that? Did you resent, were you pissed at him or were you like
yes,
trying to keep
yes,
it?
and yes, yes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yes. I'm
Right.
I was the mascot in my family. I'm not sure if you're aware of roles in family systems. Um, so I was the mascot. I was the people pleaser. I did the song and dance and made people laugh. I'm short. I'm 5 foot tall. I'm small. I used to have short, hair, and
Right.
I was fun. And so I tried to keep peace with everyone.
Made it
My
all right for
my
everybody.
sister was really enraged, and
Right.
she wanted to take care of my mother. So I was trying to, yeah, ameliorate this chaos.
And were either of them aware or any of the adults in your life aware of like how fucked up you were?
No, they weren't paying attention. They
None of the
really weren't. No,
teachers?
no.
And you
Well,
did well
but
in school, presumably, because
exactly,
you got
I
to
did,
Berkeley, right?
I
So
did.
Berkeley
But
was still a hard
that
school
was
to get
just, that was
into back
luck.
then,
That
right?
was absolute luck. Some people are good in academics and can do the whole academic scene. And I've
Right,
always been good with words. School came easily to me.
right.
And it's kind of unfair. I shouldn't have done as well as I did, but I did, and I was able to sort of skate along. I always got a lot of marks in my report card, though, of, she's not living up to her potential. And if Patty
Sure.
would stop talking for a minute, maybe
And they'd be like, well,
but
she can't because she's high on speed.
exactly, exactly. She can't sit still.
Imagine that in your teacher
Exactly.
comments. Patty, we love Patty, but if she could just like take a little less speed, we'd
Oh
um
my, yeah,
and
exactly.
and how'd you do at Berkeley? Was Berkeley okay? What'd you study
Yeah,
there?
um, well, a really classic Berkeley major. It was created in the 60s and it was called DIGS,
Hmm.
DIGS, the Department of Interdisciplinary General Study.
Yeah,
So
that sounds good.
it just was sort of like, you could dabble
You
in
do everything.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
that
exactly.
sounds cool.
So, and I had enough, I guess I was self-aware enough to know that the only way I was going to get out of the hellscape that I was in was to, do okay at school and get out.
Right.
So what I did when I hated Florida, I was there for 2 weeks and despised it. So I thought, in my very rational way, I'll go to Alaska because, opposite as you can get.
I mean, makes sense.
Exactly. And I
Opposite ends of
heard
the
that
earth.
there were 10 men to every woman in Alaska. And I said, oh man, it doesn't get better than that. And so I was a bartender in Alaska
What
for
town were you in?
in Juneau.
In Juneau. And did you drive from
Yes,
West Palm to Juneau?
yes,
And were you
yes,
by yourself for that trip?
yes, yes.
And were you drinking and boozing and
Oh
drugging
yeah.
on the trip
Oh yeah. It was
and
like,
driving?
yeah, yeah. It's like
Right.
again, hi. I had a little ice chest on my front seat, and I wasn't doing too many drugs when I was driving, but I was
Right.
definitely drinking a lot of beer
And
and
did
camping.
you
I was camping across the country,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, and then
How long did that take to get from West Palm to Juneau?
well, I stopped in Arizona for a while, and then I
Right.
stopped in Washington and got my car set up to drive along the Alcan
Right.
Highway, doing things
Sure.
like rubberizing the bottom of the car
Right.
and things.
Right. Wow.
I want to say a week, but I might be making that up.
Right.
I
Right.
don't
Right.
remember. And then in Alaska, there was so much money because it was the oil pipeline. It was building the oil pipeline. So all these men would go on the oil pipeline and they would just make buckets of money. And there was more cocaine than you can imagine. And so they'd come down with their pockets full of money and cocaine, and they would just step in the back room and cut me a couple of lines, and that was my tip. And then they'd also leave. I mean, I made more money then. That was in 1980.
Right.
I made more money bartending in 1980 than I ever made teaching at a university or teaching or running workshops, or definitely more than being an author.
Yeah. And
That's
so how long did you stay up there?
4 years.
4 years. Wow. And then what happened?
And then what happened? Well, I had a friend who was my kind of boyfriend at the time. We were more
Hmm.
friends with benefits, I guess.
Right.
And he had just come back from Europe and said he wanted to make some money. And I said, come out to Alaska. There's
Right.
lots of money to make. So he came up and we ended up getting together. And then he went to Australia to work. And this is no lie. This is a true story. In 1 week, I got a job offer. I was bartending at night and teaching at an alternative high school during the day. And I got a job offer to teach full time at the alternative school. One of the teachers there said that there was a apartment for rent in her, or rather a condo for sale in her building. And
Mm.
in Alaska at that time, because there was so much money, you could get an interest-free loan to buy
Right.
a property. So
Sure.
I could get an interest-free loan. There was this condo available. I had this job offer, and the same week I got an aerogram from Jeff. in Australia saying, meet me in Bali, let's go travel.
Right.
And in the same week, and I'm like, oh shit, what do I do? And
Wow.
I'm drinking and drugging and crazy. However, thank the universe. On this particular occasion, I sat down crying on this log, looking out at the water, saying, I really need help. I need help. I
Right.
don't know what to do. And I heard clear as a bell, if you stay here, you will die. Get out.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I
Amazing.
didn't take the job. I didn't take the condo. I left everything and I flew to Bali and met my partner then, who's my husband now.
No way. That's
Yeah, way.
amazing. I really didn't think that was the way that story was going to go. I thought you were going to be like, I took the interest-free loan and I just sold that place for $3 million. That's the
Right,
best thing
exactly.
I ever did. I'm so glad it went the other way because that sounded dreary and miserable to me. And like, I was like, God, I hope she goes to Bali.
And I did. And somehow I ended up with a man who was not an addict. God
Wow.
knows how. And so I sort of tapered off with using until we got to Japan. I got a job
Right.
teaching in Japan. And in Japan, you see, I think there's a rule. If you're an alcoholic, and it's a rule, if someone else is pouring the drinks and no one's counting, it doesn't count.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I
Right.
don't you think that's fair?
I think that sounds fair. That sounds like
Yeah,
words to live
exactly.
by.
There'll be a little bit of denial in there. Anyway, so yeah, I got working in Japan was a real and
And where
yeah,
in Japan were you? Tokyo?
no, outside of Tokyo in a smaller village, about an hour and a half
Right.
southwest of Tokyo, in a town called Odawara.
Mm.
And anyway, so fast forward, we came back to the States. He was going to get his master's. I went to see a um, tarot reading, what's it called? Astrology doer psychic.
Hmm. Hmm.
And she was looking at my chart. And she said, well, this is really interesting, Patty. You see this little quadrant here, how this. She said, that shows a lot of alcohol. And I said, yeah, my mother died when I was 16. And she said, oh, that's really sad. Yeah. But you see, right here, there's this, and this. It's a lot of alcohol. And I said, well, yeah, my dad's still alive, but he's a practicing alcoholic and blah, blah, blah. She said, yeah, but still there's this. And I said, well, my sister is also an alcoholic, but she's in recovery. So maybe that's what you're seeing. And she just laid it down, put both hands on the table and said, Patty, are you an alcoholic? Yeah.
Wow.
I burst into tears and ran out of her house and
Wow.
just sobbed and ran out of the house. That was when we were living in Oregon, when Jeff was getting his master's, and we were on our way to Tucson, Arizona, where I transferred into another program. I got in the car, literally, we were driving away,
Mm.
and I sobbed the whole way from Ashland, Oregon to Tucson, Arizona. And the next day I went to my first meeting in Tucson.
Wow.
And that was in 1988. And I was two
That,
days before my 30th birthday.
jeez. I mean, I, I, I've never been, I've had my tarot cards read once, that I'm aware that I can remember. I mean, I did a lot of things that I don't remember, but, um, and it's funny, I was in ninth grade and it was at our, like, we had like a ninth grade dance at my school. It was like a elementary school in Long Island. And I was leaving the school the next year to go to boarding school. And the tarot card reader was like, you're going somewhere where there won't be a lot of rules and you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And I was like, wow, that's not really a very nice reading. I thought all these people it's like elementary school. They should be just saying nice things to us.
Right.
And boy, was she right. I mean,
Wow.
she called that one. And you think maybe I would go back, but that's amazing that a tarot card reader saw right through. I mean, maybe you were just like reeking of booze.
Exactly.
She's like, no, 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 no. It's actually coming from right there. I think it's that the hole in the middle of your face has a lot of alcohol in it right now.
Oh God,
And
yeah.
how did you, I mean, your sister was in recovery, so you knew about AA from that, or?
Yeah, she brought me to my first meeting in the Bay Area in Oakland. And I went to the meeting with her, and somebody I
So
knew
this
came
was
up
before you got sober.
before I got sober. It was in
Oh, interesting.
1986.
Right.
And a guy came up that I knew and said, Patty, welcome. And I
Right.
said, oh, I'm just here supporting my sister. And
Right.
they both looked at each other over my head like, yeah, well, what are you gonna do?
Totally.
So yeah, it took me a couple more years to actually get into the program.
And so when you got to Tucson, how did you find a meeting? Do you just like,
Oh, how did I? I didn't find it on the internet. Um,
right?
uh, I think in the phone
You
in
could
the
call
newspaper there
one
was
eight
an AA
hundred I'm
number.
an
Yeah,
alcoholic, and it would
exactly,
set you
exactly.
up.
And they told me that I wanted a women's meeting and I
Right.
wanted it the next day, and they had one, and it was a phenomenal meeting. Women my own age, a lot of sobriety, a lot of they were young, professional. In Japanese, you say genki,
Right.
energetic, exciting
Right.
women, and I just thought, wow, this is awesome. And so got sober. Then Jeff and I got married. We went to Africa and we taught in Africa, and there were
Where in
no meetings
Africa?
in Togo in West
Uh-huh.
Africa.
Wow.
And
Wow.
we taught there, came back. I went back to Tucson, got back into my little cluster. And then Jeff got a job in New Zealand. And so
Hmm.
we were in New Zealand for 30 years. But back
Wow.
then we
What
went
does Jeff do that brought you
teaching. It
he's a teacher
was,
also, right?
yeah. And so we went to a small town in New Zealand, and the meetings, you know, denial, bullshit, say whatever you want. Um, they didn't do the meetings right. And it was mostly older men who would say, put a plug in the jug. You've got 2 ears and one mouth. Shut up and listen. And I was crying and I was
Right.
upset and I was depressed. And I said, I need more. I need more.
Right.
And I didn't find it in the 12-step programs there. And eventually my kids, I was not going to be my mother. So I was clean and sober, got pregnant, had my kids, breastfed, did everything. Then they both got into school. And I was like, yeah, well, so I'd been sober 13 years.
Hmm.
And the my kids, what people did after school is the mothers all got together, brought the kids, and they'd play on the beach. We lived right on the beach, and
Right.
the mothers would have these nice decks overlooking the sea or the beach, and the kids would be playing. And the mothers, they had great wine. What can I
Sure.
do? What
Yeah,
can I
yeah. Who'd
do?
blame you?
Exactly, exactly. That's what I said. Anyway, so after 13 years of sobriety, I started drinking again, and I was drinking, and I drank again for 13 years. So I was out
Wow.
for 13, and um, I was a productive member of society. I started a charitable trust. I ran workshops. I was a do-gooder. But I was drinking, I was hiding it, I was lying about it. And
Did you come out to your family right away that you'd had a drink, or did
oh,
you?
hell no. Oh, hell no. That's what I really got. I mean, I did tell Jeff that I was, I decided I decided I can
Right.
drink like a normal person, right? As they
Right.
say in the big book, I can do this. Um, And so I would have like one glass of wine at a party, and then I would tell her, okay, well, we're going to this thing, and I'll have one beer, and that's all. And then I'd hide it,
Right.
and he wasn't around a lot of addiction, and he didn't really know that much about addiction, and he didn't notice. And then I was, what really scared me, to be honest, Nick, what really terrified me is when I saw myself doing stuff my mother did, hiding the
Right.
bottle and recycling, adding water so that it didn't look like I drank as much. And I'm like,
Right.
what the fuck, Patty? You're in
Right.
your 30s, you're a mother, what are you doing? But alcohol is so insane. And I did that for 13 years. And finally, um, what happened was I was writing my first book, This Way Up, and I just thought, I don't like myself right now, you know.
Right.
Before I got sober the first time to keep Jeff, and because I didn't want to be my mother to my kids,
Yeah.
so I was going to be sober. And then I sort of devolved out, and I was fun, Everybody said, "Oh, Patty, you're so much fun." But this time I just didn't like myself. Not to mention, man, in your 40s, drinking like I drank, it's a bitch. It's a bitch,
I
waking
bet.
up. Ugh. So
I
when
mean,
did
just
you go
like, I mean, that was
sober?
one
How
of,
old were you?
I stopped when I was 40.
Okay.
And, I mean, I'd always had problems with hangovers. Like, hangovers were as much my problem as the crazy, irresponsible shit I did when I was drinking. But, like, it was often when I was hungover that, um, you know, that was the behavior that I had trouble dealing with, that like I was so nauseous I couldn't like perform professionally in a meeting or something. Or,
Yeah.
I'd be somewhere and like someone would be like, "What's that smell?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, that's me."
Please
Whereas
cover my
like
pores.
yeah, yeah. So I can imagine like, I stopped at 40 and, still I don't feel great in the in the mornings for no reason at all. I can only imagine what it would be like if I were, contending with a hangover as well. And like, your body's just so much less forgiving later in
Oh
life.
yeah. Oh
It's
my
like it
God,
doesn't
yes.
recover from anything as well. And,
Exactly.
so um yeah, so I can imagine that that was not pleasant.
No, no. And it's like when I was drinking, I was really, really fucking arrogant. I mean, that's
Right,
that's really what it boils down to. It's like,
right.
I've got this. And
Yeah.
every morning I would say the third step prayer. And I've got this, okay. Turning my will and my life over. I'm fine. And then I'd,
Right.
go to that just
And
saying,
during those 13 years, were there times when you were like, I need to stop? Like, I want to
oh
get back
shit,
to
yes.
sobriety? Right,
Oh, absolutely.
right.
But the thing is there was no, you've heard Johann Hari's quote, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. And
Oh,
and
interesting.
that's what I just
Yeah, yeah, of course.
so needed. I so needed. And yet I didn't have it. There was nobody in the rooms in this small town that I was in that I
Right.
related to. And
Yeah.
finally I said, I hate myself drinking this much. So I gave up and was thinking, I need connection. I need connection. And another, God moment, so to speak. I was sitting in a coffee shop with my son, and this guy walked in that I recognized from the program from before. And then right with him was this woman. And I thought, oh, she is really cool looking. She had this like
Right.
wild gray hair and really flowy dress. And I thought, oh, she's cool. So I went over to him in the coffee shop and I said, I don't know if you remember me. I was in the program a while with you. And he said, yeah, of course. You were Carla's sponsor. I remember you and blah, blah, blah. Where have
Right.
you been? What have you been doing? Blah, blah, blah. And I smiled and answered a couple of questions and then said, it's not you I want to talk to. It's you. I'm Patty. What's your name? And she said, I'm Rosie. Hi. And I said, are you in recovery too? And she said, yes. And I said, I desperately want to start a women's meet. I desperately am trying to find a women's meeting.
Right.
And she said, I don't know one. Let's start one. And we did.
Amazing. And
And we did.
were you sober at that point? You had stopped.
Yeah, I had stopped.
For how
But
long?
white knuckling it. A few months,
Right, right, right.
but without any, well, that's
No
not true. I did
support.
have the connection because of my sister, but she was in California and I was in New
Yeah.
Zealand. We'd talk on the phone, but I didn't have the, that, that,
Yeah, yeah, that sense of like, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, I mean, I I'm getting emotional. It's crazy. I mean, I just find like what happens in those rooms is just it's like a mystery. It's a miracle when it's
it
right. Like
is.
it didn't make any sense to me. It never made any sense to me. I I tried so hard through every machination to stop drinking. Like pacing myself, monitoring myself, punishing myself, rewarding myself, whatever it was. And, when I finally got, I mean, maybe it's surrender too, who knows? But like when I finally got to that point where I was like, oh, I'll do anything. I went to one meeting and that was it. Like that was
Yeah.
it. Like I mean, whatever. It was late in life for me, and I had gotten to a point where like was gonna do anything to get sober, but I was able to just like carry that strength with me and that perspective with me everywhere I went, and I don't
Yeah.
go to a lot of meetings anymore if I'm completely honest, and I miss it because it's enjoyable, but you know, um when you do find that connection and those different
Exactly.
perspectives, and yet, all these people coming from different walks of life, and they're actually sharing the same
Yeah.
dynamic and pattern and dysfunction, and you're all
Yeah.
struggling to get through. I mean, I just found so much hope in that. Anyway.
Absolutely. And, some of these guys that would walk in with tats all over and, gang energy and,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And they'd sit down and start crying and be in this place. And there would be this open heartedness that it's, without sounding OTT, it really is miraculous because it
No,
makes no
I think it's a
sense.
total miracle. And like, I
Yeah.
mean, I was just such a wreck, and like it saved me. And the thing is, I laugh. I mean, you saying that, I mean, I've told this story a bunch on this podcast, but like that first meeting that was like I was 40 and it was maybe a 60-year-old woman, and she was talking about, being a single mom and hiding booze and around her house. And I had nothing in common with this woman at all. And I was like, wow, that's my story.
Mm.
And and then the next guy was someone like me. He was like a young father. And I was like, well, that's my story too. And then the third person that I heard speak was, a 18-year-old homeless Hispanic kid. And I was like, wow, that's me too. Like it was just so revelatory. And on this podcast, actually, there's an episode where TJ Bowen tells this story of DJ Verrett, who ended up being on the podcast, is also, and he was like a leader of the Crips, and he was in jail, and he'd been in jail for like 10 years. And one day he sees this box of donuts being carried across the quad, and he's like, where are those donuts going? I want to get in that room. And the guard, he was running the jail by that point, so they get him in the room, and he's like, there's this 75-year-old Jewish lady from Beverly Hills, and she's telling my story. Like,
Right.
that is what I think is so wild about that
Yeah.
program, that like a freaking lifetime gang member identifies with, a Jewish housewife and sees himself in her, and it saves him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's true. It's miraculous. And I remember the first time I heard the promises and I just started sobbing and thought, I can't believe it will actually happen, but man, I
Right.
sure hope it might. And suddenly you do. You find these things happening. Like I didn't I turned away for a minute and it happened. How did that
Yeah, yeah,
happen?
yeah.
Those it really is. And that's one of the reasons that it still I still go to meetings. Although we just moved to Portugal. I don't know if you knew that part too. We moved from New Zealand to Portugal last week.
Wow.
Um,
What town are you in Portugal?
just north of Porto, in
Nice.
a
Porto
town on
looks
the
so
coast.
beautiful.
Have you been to Portugal?
Went in my college days, just to like the what is it, the Argov? Is that, what is it
The
called?
Algarve,
The
yeah.
Algarve, with
Mm,
a bunch of drunken friends, and it was lovely. It was really,
mm.
really fun and funny. I think about it a lot, but I haven't been to the more northern parts, which I guess are really beautiful. And we
Yeah,
made a
the
movie there.
Algarve.
My company made a movie there called Porto, of all things.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was Anton Yelchin's very last film, I believe. He was killed in like a freak accident, but I've never seen the movie. I'm not like, my company was involved in it, but I really wasn't involved in it. But my bunch of my
Okay.
colleagues were there making it, and they loved Porto. They fell in love with the town. The movie didn't turn
It's a
out very well.
beautiful town. Amazing. I'm 30 minutes north of it. So
Right.
come visit. You have a place to stay.
Nice, thank you. And so this women's group that you guys started, did that last? Did that
Yeah,
grow and
we started it
sustain?
10 years ago.
Right,
I'm 10 years clean and sober this time.
right.
I got clean and sober in November
Congrats.
2014. Thank you.
Nice,
Um, and yes, it's still going. And it
nice.
started out as a women's group, and yet men found out about it and said, we want to come. And there weren't that many women. And so we said,
Right,
okay. So men ended up joining, but Rosie and I made the rules and we said, this is about emotional sobriety and you have to be real and, don't tell anybody to shut up. And if they're crying, don't say they're there.
right.
And everybody says it's one of the most amazing meetings they've been to. And it's this small town in New
Right.
Zealand and people come from other places and
That's
it's still
wild.
going. It's still going.
Yeah, I mean, I feel lucky to have gotten sober in Los Angeles where there are so many like
So
whatever,
many meetings. Yeah.
fascinating, high functioning. I mean, I'd be in meetings with people who wouldn't give me the time of day in my regular life, but would give me, 40 minutes in an AA meeting
Yeah.
because of, their dedication to, helping other people in that program. Um, but then I've had friends, who've tried to get sober in more sort of backwater places and have struggled with kind of the things that you were struggling with, where they just don't relate to anyone in there,
Yeah.
and the problems aren't the same, and I don't know, it's amazing that you were able to find a community and build it. You know, and do you still go on Zoom? Did it
I
become a
do.
Zoom meeting
Yeah,
during
it became a
COVID?
Zoom meeting during
Right.
COVID, exactly. When COVID shut everything down, yeah, we just went into Zoom, and it was just our little group. But then we
Right.
advertised, and more people started coming in, and so yeah, I go on Zoom now.
How cool. Will you send me the link and I'll join it? That'd be
Absolutely,
fun.
absolutely. And then when I got here, we actually came to Portugal a year ago. And the reason we came is because both of our sons fell in love with European women. So one
Right.
of my sons is in Spain, and one of my sons is in Scotland. And Portugal's kind of in the middle, and Portugal's one of the few places in the world that welcomes retirees, says
Right.
you're
Right.
welcome here. Um, anyway, and so I got here, and there were no English speaking meetings in the real near vicinity. There was one in Porto, but not in the near vicinity. So I reached out to a woman that I found online, and she lives about 20 minutes north of me. And now she and I are starting an English meeting here. So we're
Oh,
starting another
cool.
one.
And your book, what is your book about?
My book is called Recovery Road Trip.
Uh-huh.
Um, what is it? There's a tagline, and I've forgotten it.
Right.
Um, my publisher named it, and so I had the Recovery Road Trip, and they added,
Right.
yeah, finding purpose and connection on the journey home.
Right.
Um,
Nice.
and it's an allegorical narrative, so it's not my story.
Right.
However, it's a lot about my story.
Right.
And it's about a woman who gets sober but feels like the spark is gone, can't find that which she still desires, finding that purpose. Um, and I ran workshops for women online for several years. And I talked to a lot of women who had relapsed. And
Mm.
I asked them, why did you relapse? What was it? And it was about seeking more fulfillment, needing a bit more than just the 12 steps, and wanting to hurt people that said, this is all you need. Come to a meeting and don't pick up. And it's like, I need more. So it's an allegorical story about a woman who drives across the United States, meeting people along the way, and finding answers.
That's interesting. I mean, I think it is a challenge for everybody. Like, you always need more.
Yeah, of course, and when I'm talking to people and they say, "Oh, well, you don't need therapy." Well, yeah, I did. I needed
Right.
a lot of therapy.
Yeah, therapy can be great. I mean, my therapist, people are like, "Do you like your therapist?" I'm like, "My therapist saved my life."
Yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, and one time so I was texting a friend to give him my therapist's information, and I said, "Yeah, he saved my life." But I sent it to him by mistake, and he's like, "Nick, what is this?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry. By the way, this is what I say about you behind your back." So this is
At
my
least that
Yelp
was that.
review.
At least it was
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
it was
yeah, totally. Um, and yeah, no, I mean, I think I don't know. When I was in college, I read this D.H. Lawrence book. I think it was called Saint Mar, and there's this like ongoing one of the female protagonists is having this ongoing sort of midlife crisis, and she keeps saying, "I want the wonder back. I want the wonder back." And I
Yeah,
think you experience this wild wonder in adolescence as you sort of discover the world and everything is new and exciting and full of possibilities. And then as you get older, some of those possibilities shut down and people disappoint you and life disappoints you. And, it's hard to discover that sense of awe again and again
exactly.
in your life. And there's something, it's literally intoxicating to feel that way. To
Yeah,
feel excited by the possibilities ahead of you is like a wild feeling in life. And, you know, if you can't get it in your life, you can get it temporarily from a bottle. You really can. You can feel that sense of drunken excitement. And you know, it's
And that sense of possibility, it's sort of like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen tonight.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, for me, what really happened with alcohol was like, oh, I discovered what was going to happen. Nothing.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
got
But somehow your brain keeps saying,
and I really, that was a big part of why I stopped, was I was like, oh,
yeah,
I've discovered everything there is to discover in this, and it goes nowhere. It's not interesting. None of the things that are happening to me anymore are interesting to me at all. And if
yeah,
I want the wonder back, I got to go looking somewhere else.
exactly, exactly. And that's a lot about what I talk about in Recovery Road Trip, is like
Interesting.
rediscovering that, finding that purpose, finding that
Right.
essence, and
Right.
through people that the protagonist meets, and a lot about creativity, finding that
Sure.
connection to that higher self, to that flow through creativity, through connection with different people. So yeah, and that's the first half of the book, is through a story, and the second half of the book is a journaling workbook that follows the protagonist's journey.
Wow, that sounds very cool. I'm gonna have to check it out.
Thank you.
Well, Patti, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story. It was really such a delightful conversation. Your publicist, or whoever set this up, said it was going to be a delightful conversation, and I was like, I don't know. Like,
I don't
I was
know.
skeptical. I was skeptical. But
Well, I'm
she was
really
right.
glad.
She was completely right.
Oh, gotta love Joanne. Yeah,
Well, if you
absolutely.
make it out to LA, please come say hello. Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.